Welcome to the August 9th edition of the PFF Forecast. It is a beautiful Wednesday evening. Brad is joining us right before his much bigger, more important show. He goes on NFL Network in about an hour. But we have a great show planned for you. We're going to hit a kind of potpourri of topics here. We've got the ESPN Bet news, going to discuss that. Less about like the deal mechanics and more about what it means for betting for the marketplace. Obviously, betting and date night etiquette needs to be talked about. If you have not seen that, we'll explain what we mean by this. Little Hard Knocks review, very short, just some takeaways, some things that I might want to bet on. We'll see if these guys can convince these guys based on the vibes that I got from them. And then last but not least, it is fantasy season. So we're going to talk a little bit about fantasy players who we are higher or lower on than ADP. Are there any bets that correlate to that? Any prop bets? It's going to be a great show. Well, let's rock. All right, fellas, we have Brad back. Not only did he survive, he thrived. The facial hair is back. It is strong. So we feel whole again, which is great. If you are new to the podcast, welcome, member of the printing press. If you are a longtime member, you're certainly a part of our Discord. Wanted to open up and welcome anyone that is new to the Discord and announce to members of the printing press that have been loyal and with us for a while that we will be debuting this year something really cool. One of them is we're giving away merch. We already started that. The second is we guess the lines every Sunday night. Probably the best thing about this podcast. And we're going to be opening up that competition to any member of the community with a free to enter guess the lines forecast contest. I clearly didn't think of the branding for the name, but that's to come. So make sure you join the Discord. The link is in the description below and also posted on Twitter. All right, fellas, let's get into it. Let's start with this ESPN bet thing. Brad, I'll kind of start with you. If you want to give a little kind of high level on the deal, I think there's been a few things reported. You've seen the headlines certainly, which are number one, that ESPN Bet is now going to exist and that Dave Portnoy bought back all of Barstool. There are a few nuances there that I think are worth mentioning if you want to kick us off.
Sure. Yeah. So the news from yesterday that Penn Gaming, which owned a large portion of Barstool, I think they gave $500 million for pretty much the ownership of the entire entity. They've divested their entire ownership. They've given Dave Portnoy back the company. Sounds like for $1. That detail came out a couple hours ago. And the deal, though, is Barstool now has a non-compete. They cannot partner with a sports book in the same manner, but I think also they can't probably have the official sports book of Barstool is DraftKings. If you want to bet, go to DraftKings. They can't do marketing deals. And you would imagine that the biggest partnership they had, even before Penn, their largest revenue driver of the company was probably from partnerships with sports books trying to push consumers to their book. So all those things happen, and Penn instead is pivoting. Sounds like a 10-year, $1.5 billion deal with ESPN to now rebrand all of the brick and mortar and the app and all those things as ESPN Bet. That is the new entity they're opening up under Penn. Sounds like Barstool, they were never really able to crack it. In some of the major markets, they had 4 to 7% of market share. FanDuel, DraftKings, anywhere from 40 to 35 range. And obviously Caesars, BetMGM, etc. So yeah, a pretty huge deal. And I think I tweeted this out yesterday, but I think the biggest takeaway, and it does tie to the podcast, in my opinion. I'm not trying to go on a soapbox here, but the idea I think a lot of these companies had was, all we care about is customer acquisition. I know even DraftKings in the books that are doing well are spending like 75% of revenues, or some stories, solely on customer acquisition. And I think they fail to think about customer retention. And I think Barstool is way worse than any of the books that we talk about and use, where they were promoting the most exploitative bets that were stupid as could be. And I would say the way it ties this, I'll be done in a second here, is like, look, are we the most hot take podcast? Are we firing off a billion bets? Are we talking about 5-unit super bombs, whatever? Like, no, because we want you to bet for a long period of time, to manage a bankroll, have fun, enjoy yourself, and not just kind of, come in, deposit $500 and be done in a month. That's why we feel, we create the content we do, because that is not the way to actually be a sustained, enjoyable gambler.
I thought you were going to say the big takeaway was that finally the branding of the can't lose parlay is right, which is awesome. I love the way that Big Cat handled that. I thought it was fantastic. But that's definitely one takeaway. The second big takeaway, and then I'll let you, Judah, give us some real deal spiel here. The second takeaway is that ESPN FPI and BPI, there was some thoughts maybe by me and some others that maybe would be lucky enough for ESPN to think that they could infiltrate the trading desks and provide us with opportunities to, for example, bet on the Miami Heat as a 1% or 3% implied probability to beat the Celtics, which is what they had. I think a couple years ago, they had the Celtics 80% to beat the Warriors. But it doesn't look like we'll get that opportunity. And that's a real bummer. Judah, what did you make of this? What were your big takeaways here?
Yeah. First off, I was bummed that we're not going to get an ESPN FBI. That was my immediate reaction. I think it's a huge, huge bet on a market that I think is changing quicker than people realize. And by that, I mean, I don't necessarily think the biggest bettors, and Brad, this is kind of to your point, are going to be betting on sports books in 2, 3, 4 years. With the exchanges that are popping up, I'm thinking of places like Sport Trade, Profit Exchange, Novig, all of these which are either live or about to be live. Those are like really appealing to the price sensitive consumers. And I think that people who are especially serious about betting will either move to the states in which those are located, or I would not be surprised if there's kind of movement to legalize across the United States, maybe ambitiously getting rid of the Wire Act, which is kind of right now a main roadblock. But it's a huge bet in exactly the points that you're making, which is they're not doing a good job of customer retention. I think that was kind of the issue with Barstool. And I don't think if you're not going to be price sensitive, which I don't think these books are, and this is a huge, huge investment. And it's basically saying we're going to appeal to the whatever it is, 17 million people that are on ESPN's site. We're going to turn them into bettors. If you're not sensitive about keeping them betting and keeping them at least somewhat profitable, I think it's just like a slower death, especially with exchanges coming up, which are going to suck up basically anyone who's especially profitable or betting a lot of money or price sensitive. And it's kind of a landscape I don't think people are necessarily thinking about. I'm not sure. Obviously, ESPN has done their due diligence. I just think you're running into the same issue of there's only so much that a casual bettor can kind of handle, and there are only so many casual bettors out there. Eventually, it's going to run out.
The customer retention point is one that, look, to be perfectly frank, is the kind of strategy that, and not to give too much away what we're doing here, but that has been our where we think the future of the market is going, right? Because to your point, Brad, it's like early on you're going to make the biggest kind of splash by getting market share, and it's going to take a while for someone to leave your sportsbook, right? So if you can acquire them, you get them to make a deposit. It's interesting, like you make a deposit, you're kind of stuck there for a little while unless you spend it all, and you can kind of keep them strung on, right? So you can keep giving people opportunities to stay with your sportsbook, but that costs you money, right? So that's all marketing spend, like not just to acquire the customer initially, but then to keep them going with bonus bets and all this crap. So it's a really, really good point. What I think is interesting is the bet here, I think, is also in part to what will retain customers. And so I'm curious on this point because ESPN is the one making money here, right? Penn is paying ESPN about $2 billion, $1.5 billion in cash. And then ESPN is getting $500 million worth of warrants. And so ESPN is basically making $2 billion here. I would argue from Penn's perspective, $2 billion, I think it's over 10 years. Is that right, Brad? Is actually, I think, a pretty darn good deal, like a very good deal, given the fact that I think there's 117 million monthly viewers or visitors to like ESPN.com or something like that. I believe I'm getting that right. But anyways, the scale that they're getting at, I think this is a really good deal for Penn. And the bet here, I believe, is not just a customer acquisition one, but that you will be able to retain those customers because of the content that ESPN is creating and that you're continuously seeing, right? So every time you go watch a college football game, you go watch an NBA game, you're going to see those same opportunities. They're going to be linked to the things that you're betting in your sports book. I think when you go to your sports book, when you open up ESPN Bet, you are going to see a ton of ESPN content. Like, we might not get bets, might not get prices set by FPI, but I guarantee we'll get FPI in the sports book, right? Like, helping people make, more confident, not necessarily smarter bets, obviously, but more confident bets there. And I think that is a really interesting bet. I think it signals a shift in what we will see within the, let's just call it sports betting or sports trading, whatever you want to look at it. Like, how do you engage the person that doesn't study this the way that you do, Judah, the way that you do, Brad, that is coming in? Because here's another interesting thing, and I'll stop my TED Talk after this. You mentioned it, Judah. A lot of the sharp, big bettors, I want to be careful there, sharp and big bettors are going to go to exchanges because you're going to get a better price. I think what's really interesting about the betting market is that you don't have to be sharp to be a big spender, right? This is the case everywhere, right? This is the case you go to Vegas, right? You go into the VIP section, you don't just see sharp players. You see plenty of guys and gals that cannot, they have no idea what they're doing. They are not sharp. And I think that's going to be really, really interesting because retaining those players, to me, is where a lot of the revenue is going to come from. So it's still casual bettors, but because of our economy, because of what the US is, a casual bettor doesn't necessarily mean they are a small bettor. And I think retaining those customers is going to be the name of the game.
My big thought with the ESPN thing with retention was, I actually was chatting about this with our old friend Austin Gale yesterday when the tweet came out, but like, how do you keep someone in a sports book, whether it's an app or a brick and mortar, in the same way you turn on the oxygen and you give out free drinks at a casino playing table games, right? And I think my thought was their idea was probably, like you mentioned, the $10 free bets or the boosts that your friends can join and get better value. And I think all that stuff didn't really work or doesn't really work. But the live betting space, in my opinion, is probably still how you accomplish that. And ESPN, and like, we make fun of the app and all those things, but they've been trying to pump out data to your phone as fast as possible in a live setting for sports since I can remember, right? That's kind of been like a big piece of their infrastructure. So I imagine maybe that is part of the thinking there. But at the same time, kind of a random thought, they also cut down a ton of gambling content when they just laid a bunch of people off. Like, a lot of their top gambling, content producers were part of the layoff. So it's such a weird kind of dichotomy between those two things.
Yeah,
they brought McAfee in, so he's like such a big. I mean, that's it. Clear that McAfee, you knew this kind of thing was coming when they got McAfee. There's no way you're paying him that much unless you've got some kind of betting play, because that's like, his MO, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm curious how it kind of changes the TV shows and like network personalities.
Yeah.
And if it's like really, that could totally change the sports media landscape. Like, ESPN is leaning like fully into gambling. Like, that's a huge shift, which I think might be kind of the consequence of this. I'm kind of curious how that plays out over the next little bit.
It just makes it makes the content worse because none of these people know what they're talking about, right? Like, I mean, they had a gambling show, and I actually think ESPN does a lot of things really, really well. They had a sports betting show that was honestly comedic to watch. I mean, it was hilarious, right? Like, and that was them being serious with people that were trying really, really hard, and it was a comedy show. So you're telling me that you're going to get, Stephen A. Smith talking about sports betting is going to be the greatest content on planet Earth. Like,
it is.
It's going to be absolutely fantastic. But you can tell people that like are actually betting versus those that are not so easily. I think that, to your point, Judah, like, that's going to be super interesting. How much does this degrade ESPN's content? But I don't think that matters that much because it's all about live sports. That's the only thing that really matters. And they own so much live sports. And that really is what's going to drive I think it's going to be very interesting to see what other shoes fall from this, how a FanDuel, how a DraftKings react. And to your point, Judah, what exchanges look like, coming forward. I think that's a good call out. Did anyone, let's close out on this. Did anyone lose in this deal? Like, is there a loser? Is the better a loser here? Is, like who doesn't come out of this in a good spot? What are the negative ramifications?
I would say Penn did record an $850 million loss, so they literally are a loser. But I think to a degree, like, it's a solid pivot. It probably, they got out as soon as they realized this method was not going to work. And Barstool, I think you could call them a loser, but obviously they just, got him. Basically what it turns into is a massive influx of cash with strings attached, of course, where Penn would still get money if they were to sell or give out a dividend or things like that. But I don't know, in a weird way, I think you could argue everyone won and also everyone kind of lost.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't have any strong take.
No take.
I'm not. Look, I think Penn might come out of this with the short end, but it's hard to know, and who am I to really say?
It's hard to imagine ESPN losing because they're so big, and this is kind of, they're just getting paid to basically place this bet, pun intended. But I do think ESPN is the one making the biggest bet here, right? Just in terms of what they mean to the sports landscape. How this goes, I think, will influence a lot of other big players in the sports betting and sports landscape. Look, this is just making something that's been really, really clear, I think, to a lot of us for a while, kind of uncovering it, which is people want skin in the game on sporting events. Like, that's the thing. People watch them because they really care about their teams, or they've got an investment somewhere. That's why fantasy is such a big deal, right? And so this is just kind of making it very clear that people are going to engage in sports by betting on it, and how that matriculates through everything else, Sunday ticket, this whole stuff. So I think this is a win because it accelerates for bettors what the landscape will look like. I'm glad they got it done before this year happened. Okay. Let's move on from that and talk very quickly about this betting date night etiquette. So here's let me set the table for you. You can go check this out. It's all over social media. A woman posted a video talking about how she went on a date. Really nice guy, super polite gentleman, takes her out to dinner and is, quote unquote, literally betting on DraftKings, according to her, during the date, is checking his phone. At one point during conversation with her, just starts celebrating because his bet hit. He then posted a video to kind of explain what happened. He had, a pretty big win with a Mookie Betts home run that didn't look like was going to cash. It then hit during the dinner. So let's go through this quickly. Brad, let's start with you. What's proper date/betting etiquette?
So yeah, I speak from the perspective of I've probably been married since gambling is legal, so it's not a first date. I think it's a different conversation. But speaking to my people out there that are in long-term relationships, I feel like if you're going to do it, you basically have to say like, all right, well, whatever. If we do hit, I'm buying shots or I'm getting us, a nice bottle. Like it has to be everyone at the table wins if you're going to be checking your phone at an intimate, dinner setting with your significant other. So that's the way I think you have to play. You can't just be sitting there like texting your boys and pumping your fist, yelling at your phone about Mookie Betts. I think it's a tougher sell on a first date because I don't know how you make that a communal event because odds are the date does not care whatsoever about your parlay with Mookie Betts.
Yeah, I like where head's at, Brad. I think you definitely got to establish, a base here. She seemed to be pretty into the gambling stuff to begin with. I think you say, look, I've got this one leg, leave it out. Also, he's talking about planning in advance. You got to go to a place with a TV. You can't be checking the phone. The phone's a huge issue. It distracts from the person. But if you're looking in your peripheral vision, watching the TV, and you've got Mookie Betts, you're like, hey, Mookie Betts just, got this home run to cash the parlay. It's an exciting thing, right? You've already set the standard that like this is going on. It's in the peripheral, both literally and on our date, but it's still happening. We should celebrate. Then you can, go buy drinks, but you gotta prepare. You gotta plan in advance. You got to know, you got to pick a place, pick the right table where you can have clear view of the TV. I think that's gotta be the first thing you do.
You can do all those things and it's still like someone I think posted something which is like you got to find out, if they're game for that kind of thing. Like, are they going to be, you find out real quick whether they're a fan of your lifestyle very quickly. But you can do that and be smarter. Everything you guys said, you have to get them in on it. Okay, they have to feel like they're rooting for it as well. And it's actually, I think, an opportunity to make a date, potentially a first date, kind of fun. Like, first dates are always sort of awkward. You're asking about random baloney. Like, go to a fun place. You have to be able to watch the game. It's a great point. You let them in on it. You tell them, hey, here's the thing. Like, I made this bet. I made it before I knew we were going out. So like, don't, think I'm doing this only for the date. But if it hits, I'm going to make $500. Dinner's on me. Like, let's root for it. Case closed. Easy, done. This shouldn't be that hard of a thing. This guy maybe needs to call 1-800-GAMBLER. Speaking of DraftKings Sportsbook, talk about a segue. Okay. I've been,
A plus.
Some of the transitions been a little
clean.
rough. That was not. This season, DraftKings has launched the largest best ball tournament in DraftKings history. $10 million in guaranteed cash prizes with the best ball millionaire tournament. It's only on DraftKings. And with promo code PFF, you get your first entry to the best ball millionaire contest back in DK dollars. Here's the beautiful thing about best ball. If you don't know already, you just draft the team. That's it. You draft a great team. You don't have to add players, drop players, trades, decide who to start and sit, because your top scorers count towards your score every single week. So you draft well and then you win. That's how it works. Teams with the most points at the end of the season will have a shot to take home a $1 million top prize. Promo code PFF. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app right now and use it to get your first entry back in DK dollars. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Whether they can help you organize a date, I do not know. We can do that though. So just listen to the podcast. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com for details. Also, as a parent, make sure that if you have children, you're teaching them how to gamble responsibly, but also protect them for the future. And do so, I hate to bring this up, but you might want to think about insurance. It's a decent thing, not when you're playing blackjack, but certainly when you're thinking about your family. I got to be honest with you. I think term life insurance, I'm like, there's no way. I have no idea how to even find that. I feel like it's going to be some laborious, terrible, horrible experience. But Fabric by Gerber Life makes this easy. All you have to do is go online. You can do it on your phone. You can learn about what term life insurance can do for you, and you can get a quote in less than 10 minutes. You go to meetfabric.com/forecast. And in 10 minutes, you can have an affordable term life insurance policy that'll set you and your family up so that you can worry about the other things, like how you're going to, teach your son how to gamble. Very important stuff like that. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Remember, that is meetfabric.com/forecast. All right. Next topic. We've got a little Hard Knocks. Did you guys both watch last night?
Yes, sir.
Did not.
No, Judah did not. Okay, so we've got to give Judah a succinct summary of what happened. Brad, I am very curious. You've got what is the headline for you from that first episode?
Obviously they tried to do the Aaron Rodgers, image cleaning, and he's the king of New York, and all his teammates love him. Young, old, new, elder statesman that can't get enough of Aaron Rodgers. Nathaniel Hackett's the nicest guy in the world, and Sean Payton's a big old bully over in Denver. I'll say for me though, the biggest thing, the coolest takeaway, I could watch one-on-ones of Garrett Wilson versus Sauce Gardner. I could watch a full episode of just one-on-ones between Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner.
Yeah, the first takeaway was, oh my God, I did not know that we needed to get knee pads for the entirety of the Hard Knocks crew because of what they decided to do for Aaron Rodgers. That was unbelievable. They were clearly like, look, we got to make him cool with telling us some stuff. So that was, you feel like the name Hard Knocks, you're going to get some real. That was not it. That ain't it. And so that, I guess that was kind of to be expected. That was my big takeaway. I was like, oh my gosh, this is hilarious. I will say though that the takeaway that I think we can maybe leverage to make some money here is this was the first time that I felt like I got to listen to Robert Saleh in any kind of meaningful way. And I was impressed with him. I mean, I liked him before. Obviously, I'm a Niners fan, so I paid attention to him. I thought his command for the room. Obviously, they're not going to show him in a embarrassing situation, but I thought you could really tell that he resonated with the players. Hackett, I think, is interesting. Where like clearly he rubs some guys the wrong way. Feels like he doesn't have his what together all the time, but like people love him. Whereas with Salah, it felt like there was a level of respect, and his command for the room was such. So I liked that a lot. Can I just say that the most annoying thing on the planet yesterday was when they were doing the defensive meeting afterwards, and Rodgers just made some insane throw, and the I think is it Jeff Ulbrich who's the
D coordinator?
Yeah. He's like talking about how great the defense played, even though they got scored on, and how like there's only one quarterback in the NFL that can make this throw, and he's their effing quarterback. And it's like, get me a brown bag to vomit in. I do not need this content.
Yeah. I think Patrick Mahomes can make that throw. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I think he can pull that one off. But no, I mean it was all to be expected. The Leo Schreiber stuff was cool too. It's pretty funny. He was like, "Yeah, I do absolutely nothing for this show. I just talking to him like, he flew in on a helicopter, Judah, and came to practice because Rodgers calls him the voice of God, and was like they were just sitting there praising each other back and forth. Yeah, it was a beautiful thing, in a way. But no, it was a good episode. It was interesting. And like you said, George, they're probably trying to soften him up so they get some more content. I will say, not that I need like drama or like anything like that, but the early seasons of the show, I think were cool because it was like more journalistic and like coverage. And now it's just like propaganda, which it's still cool, but it's not the same like concept as the original, Hard Knocks.
Right. Yeah. It's very, very different. I will say like, we've talked about this. I'm very bullish on the Jets. I think if you watch that, it's hard to tell, what Rodgers looks like. But for everyone that thought he was washed last year, I think it's going to be a very rude awakening for people. And you probably are starting to get a glimpse of it here if you can kind of comb through all of the baloney. That team is talented, and Rodgers was hurt last year. He's going to be a machine this year. I still think because of their early schedule, I'm waiting to bet them until it's maybe a little rough in the early going, even though they play well. So I think we'll be looking at a lot of the, the kind of underlying metrics, right? Things like Judah, like drive quality and all the work that you've done this offseason to kind of see like, okay, they're losing these games. People are, freaking out because it's New York, but are they really, are they kind of figuring it out? Because I think they could be a big value, at some point early on in the season.
Yeah. I like that. That take for sure. Look, on Hard Knocks, I think Hard Knocks is doing a disservice, not interviewing some of the personnel that they have, specifically some of the football analytics interns. I mean, that is content that I'm craving. I need that. Quite frankly, if I found out that was there, I would probably leave this episode and go watch Hard Knocks.
Yeah, we'll start an interview our guy Arjun. Interview AJ campaign for the next. I mean, I was hoping we'd get a glimpse, a peek, but not yet. We have the voice of God. We'll get the mind of God on there soon enough. All right, we have one last segment before we get there. This is my favorite read. You know what it is. It's Manscaped, baby. Get yourself cleaned up. It's getting hot. It's summer. It's even a little humid over here in lovely San Diego. And so if you're carrying around a bunch of extra hair, it ain't going to be fun, right? Just the right amount of facial hair to make it look nice and smooth, but you got to get rid of the excess stuff. And Manscaped makes that so easy. The Lawnmower 4.0. We even had someone in the Discord say they would buy one. Now it was in response to us wanting to kick someone out who was trying to sell stuff, but nonetheless, people love it. Okay, that's the point. I love it. I use it. The Performance Package 4.0 comes with everything you need, the ultimate grooming bundle for the summer. And here's the deal: promo code PFF, 20% off plus free shipping. If you have some like old stuff, like I'm telling you, you will be happy if you purchase this. They also have the new facial hair trimmer, which is really, really fantastic. It's a well-made product. So everything that they have there, I can highly recommend. I use both, and I've been really happy every time I've upgraded. So go get yourself a little Manscaped package and 20% off with promo code PFF. Do that now. All right, Brad, you're only a few minutes away from talking to the good people on NFL Network. We're going to dive in a little bit here. People are starting to think about their fantasy drafts. And by the way, if you are, PFF Plus got a lot of good stuff for you. Live draft assistant, all of the insights and the great minds of Timo Riske at your disposal live during your draft. ADP represents, I think, a pretty good view of how the market of, learned football fans kind of think about players, especially at this time of the year. And it's a fun one to kind of think about, okay, who's being overrated, who's being underrated based on where they're getting drafted. So we'll start with you, Brad, a guy whose ADP, and by the way, let us know which ADP you want to use, and kind of think about, are these too high or these too low?
Yeah, so I just Googled consensus ADP, clicked on the first link, which I think was Fantasy Pros. And then I don't know, I'm a half PPR truther, so I was going by half PPR. If you use standard or full PPR, you're doing it wrong, respectfully. But anyway, that's what I'm going off. Well, Judah, what are you? Are you a full PPR guy? What are you working with?
I was groomed through DraftKings. This entire process starts with, DFS way back when, full PPR, obviously the way to go.
Okay, if for DFS, I think it's fair. I don't know. Full PPR, not to go on a tangent, but you get Darrington Evans is as valuable as Gus Edwards because a 2-yard catch is equivalent to a 7. Yeah. Anyway, whatever you want to use. I'm looking right now at half-point PPR. Brandon Cooks, we talked about the Cowboys a ton. Brandon Cooks is currently the wide receiver 40 according to the site I'm looking at right now. The biggest narrative I think for all of this is really goes back to just talking about how everyone thinks Dallas is going to shift to this run heavy team and all these things. With the transition from Kellen Moore to Mike McCarthy as the offensive play caller, these stats come from Graham Barfield, who I think does fantasy work. But the Cowboys were 28th in early down pass rate last year, and Mike McCarthy from 2016 to 2018 was number 1 in the NFL in early down pass rate. It's a difference of 50% to 60%, so a pretty sizable jump. Brandon Cooks, too, look, was he great last year? No. Do I think he really cared what was happening in Houston? Also, no. The guy is just, we have NGS tracking data for receivers that we look at here. Cooks is still playing at the same speed he's been playing at his entire NFL career, even into last season. It's going to be way more volume. It's going to be a legitimate NFL team. He hasn't been on a real NFL team in a couple of years. And I just think wide receiver 40 is too low for Brandon Cooks.
Like it quite a bit. Judah, what you thinking?
Yeah, so I was using DraftKings again. Gotta go with the OG here. What I think is super interesting actually is cross-pollinating markets. So looking at ADP and how that corresponds to betting markets. One that specifically stood out was Rachaad White, who was 74th in ADP total. I don't have the running back numbers in front of me. And then at 86, we had David Montgomery, J.K. Dobbins, Isaiah Pacheco. It's interesting because, so let's use Pacheco and Rachaad White here. Isaiah Pacheco is got an 110-yard higher prop. It's 775, whatever it is. Yes, DraftKings is also taking into account touchdowns, things of that sort. Isaiah Pacheco is on a better offense, obviously, with the Chiefs relative to what should be a pretty bad offense in the Bucs. I'm going to say Pacheco. Again, I'm going to guess this is running back 22 or 23 or something like that. And Pacheco is a guy who clearly took over the role in the second half. Yes, McKinnon got some snaps, especially in pass game, but the value of Chiefs carries are just so much higher than everyone else. And when I'm looking at who's around, and David Montgomery is in a timeshare, he's probably on the wrong side of that. J.K. Dobbins perennially injured. The Ravens also use tons and tons of backs. His upside near the end zone is capped by Lamar Jackson's rushing ability. Pacheco seems pretty underpriced to me, even despite the Chiefs' pass tendencies, especially in the red zone. And again, looking at the betting markets would suggest the same thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's a couple that stand out to me. Just kind of looking at kind of the consensus ADPs here. One, I think you can look at them and you can see sort of the average. And I guess, thinking about the extremes, like at least from a fantasy perspective, if you're looking kind of further down, it's like, am I drafting a player who's like a value slightly on ADP, or am I drafting a guy who has a chance to be kind of a league winner, right? From a fantasy perspective, it's like you either win or you lose. Like, I don't know how many places give out a ton of stuff for coming in like third place, but like you want to try and win the league. And so you need, I think, to have some shots there. You also need to realize that a lot of those picks kind of later on, you're going to, likely drop at some point. So I always like to look at the ADPs that are later on and say, like, where is there a guy who's got, potential top 10 or top 5 at position talent? And then, that's just kind of being forgotten a little bit. So a couple of these, I think you mentioned Pacheco. You look at a guy like Cook on the Bills, and then Devin Achane. Is it Achane? Achane, not Achane. Achane on the Miami Dolphins. So Cook is at about ADP like 90-ish. Achane is at 114. I think they're both really interesting from a kind of profile perspective of a running back that could catch a ton of passes and a very explosive passing offense, but also because of that passing offense could have a lot of wide open room to run. Both should be really high scoring offenses. I think they're really interesting, particularly from the running back perspective. You just always see guys that can potentially be, or that shoot up into like the top 10, top 5 of the position, that are drafted way down low. And so I think trying to find and identify those players is really the interesting piece. Any others, Brad, that come to mind?
Well, I'm talking about 3 of them on NFL Network in half an hour, so I don't want to give away any others. But your narrative right there ties into 2 of the 3 I'm talking about exactly, where it's also, the deep sleeper gems are great, but also find a guy who's wide receiver running back 22 that could be wide receiver running back 4, in the right narrative. I think that is how you should attack, the mid rounds of a fantasy football draft.
Yeah, that's in many ways, our same game parlay process. I've got a couple looking at the bottom of the list. I'm not going. I can't pronounce the Tennessee Titans tight end.
Chicken-Conquo, our guy,
our guy, who I think is priced as such because he didn't really earn big role last year. He ran like I'm spitballing. I think it was like 12 routes, more than 12 routes, only a couple of times last season. So I saw something like that on Twitter recently, which I think kind of ignores exactly this point that we're talking about, which is what if he kind of gets more work, which would not be surprising, especially for a second-year tight end. We've talked about development curves with tight ends, and this is a guy who seriously has the talent to be even the number 1 target on the Titans. And yes, it's not going to be a necessarily high-volume offense, probably not so efficient, but in fantasy football, if you've got a guy with a 25% target share, who's certainly talented. If you look at any of the separation metrics, the after the catch stuff, he's certainly popping among tight ends. And you just kind of have to play a little bit of projection of like, if he gets that role, which is very much possible. None of us have any idea what's going on in the Titans organization. That could very well be in the cards. There's almost no risk here. I'm looking at ADP 150, and this guy has a legitimate shot at finishing in the top 3 of tight ends.
Yeah, no, Austin Hooper's not there anymore. That's the big piece too. He kind of soaked up targets last year in Tennessee. So yeah.
Emphasis on just soak, not really doing.
Oh yeah.
got to get Chig the ball and get out of the way. God, what a legend! Former lock of the week legend. All right, that's our show. We'll be back with you on Sunday. Reminder: go join the printing press. Get yourself some new merch. We're giving out more hats. You can check them out in there. People posting them. More hats on their way to a few lucky winners. So go get yours, and we will see you in a couple of days. Peace out.